What's good, Zocklet? Welcome to Ethan Ranting. Tonight's topic is original first-person shooters. Now, what inspired this was the thread on Zocklet. Satire was asking for some recommendations for first-person shooter games, and I thought it would be cumbersome to list all of the merits of all these games that I listed in the thread, so I thought I'd make a video about it. Down the list we go. Half-Life series. Well, I don't really have anything to say about Half-Life 2 and the expansions, because it's been covered so many times, and if you haven't heard of Half-Life 2, then, you know, what the fuck. But I will comment on the original Half-Life. The reason being is that Half-Life received Game of the Year award by over 40 publications when it first came out. Reasons being, the AI at the time was astonishing. Now, by today's standards, it would still be good. Better than average, anyway. Enemies attempted to flank you. If they knew they were going to die, they might drop grenades. They would use grenades, which back then wasn't common. Especially using grenades to smoke you out. They would use grenades to smoke you out of cubby holes or wherever you were hiding. And this is just the military AI. There was a variety of unique aliens in the game, which were hostile, and the weapons all had. This is back when it was standard of a first-person shooter to have unique weapons. So each weapon had its advantages. There was, of course, you know, the shotgun and the machine gun, and every weapon was required to have a secondary function. So the shotgun could shoot 2 shells at once. The machine gun had an attachment for a grenade launcher, and then there was a bunch of quirky weapons like you know, like energy beams and stuff I can't quite remember now. But there was, in summary, a wide variety of enemies, masterfully designed maps, and an incredible array of weapons. Not to mention that Half-Life spawned Counter-Strike. Without Half-Life, we would have never had Counter-Strike. Had a great mod community. The Doom series. The Doom series is great because, well, anyone that was raised in the 90s knows how fucking awesome Doom was. Just the enemy count, the badass weapons, the gore, the heavy metal soundtrack. It was killer. It was like a Metallica video game, which heavily inspired the developers. Not to mention that the core of the game was developed by 4 people, which back then was a monumental task for the size of their game, especially considering that John Romero did most of the levels himself. I think they got it done in like a year and a half or something like that. On little sleep and fueled by Diet Pepsi and pizza, no less. Also had a robust mod community. Yeah. I don't have them. They're on the counter, I think.
Are you sure?
Oh, they're not in my pockets.
Well, that's not good.
That'll be fine. Back to it. We had Doom 3, which was scary by no stretch of the imagination. A lot of people complained that you couldn't have your flashlight out at the same time as a gun, and I will be the voice of reason and say that was the fucking point. It was scary because you're always in dark corridors, and the best way to illuminate the area was with muzzle flash. Just beautiful. Of course, the on-screen enemies dropped from, say, a maximum of 30 in the original Doom to probably a maximum of 4 in Doom 3. But at the time, it was the most sophisticated lighting and shadow system. It was the first game to feature self-shading. That's where a model can cast a shadow on itself. And while there was a lot of canned scares, you know, enemies spawning and set pieces that after you go through them the first time, you know, you can expect them. Despite all that, it was a scary game. It was an intense game. It had white knuckle moments, and it did do a pretty good job of making you shit your pants, at least back then. I got kind of, I beat it, but I got kind of bored of it about halfway through. I was almost desensitized to the scare moments. But they still did it great, and they did it better than most people in the industry could ever do it. Plus, this was released around the time Half-Life 2 came out. And at the time Doom 3 came out, the graphics were so incredible that the reviewers or the officials at the E3 demonstration needed proof that it was a live build and not a pre-rendered scene, because they were just blown away by the graphics. And that's still the case today. I mean, whether you enjoy Rage or not, it's probably the most beautiful game and the most astounding technical achievement on the market right now. The Duke Nukem series. I was originally disappointed with Duke Nukem Forever until I watched a review by Razorfist, which pretty much said, you know, Duke Nukem delivered exactly what it had been promising all this time, and now that I think about it, it does. There's some dated concepts that you can tell were mid to late 90s development ideas that kind of didn't really translate too well in, 2010? But back to the original Duke Nukem, or I should say Duke Nukem 3D. There were two side-scrolling Duke Nukem's before Duke Nukem 3D, which aren't worth mentioning here. But Duke Nukem 3D just had wanton carnage. It was, the weapons were over the top, super destructive. Duke Nukem was a foul-mouthed badass. It smoked cigars and slapped titties. The alien units were varied enough to have fun with it. The levels were destructible in places. One of the weapons was a pipe bomb. I mean, this shit was off the chain. And like Half-Life, when the developers were more or less finished with the game, they looked at it. They had about 6 months of development, or 6 months of wiggle room to polish the game, and they decided that the game was so weak that they scrapped it and they more or less built it from scratch. So look at Half-Life as an accomplishment that took place in almost 6 months. And sure, they had the textures and the sounds and stuff, but they rebuilt the games from the ground up with only half a year remaining, because they weren't satisfied with what they were releasing, like some of the other first-person shooter companies out today. 3D Realms and Valve would not settle for less, and they went back and they made it a great gaming experience. To this day, I still reinstall Duke Nukem 3D and find some user maps, which is another great merit of Duke Nukem 3D. It has a gigantic base of user maps that push the build engine into places where the developers wouldn't have thought possible. They pretty much just tore the engine a new asshole figuring out exploits to get things to work in maps that the original developers never planned for, and they did a great job of it. So if you feel inspired to download Duke Nukem 3D, I would check out the Red series and the Rock series, R-O-C-H. The first is survival horror levels that, despite being completely vanilla, are actually scary as hell. And then also the Rock series is an open world city maps, pushing the build engine to its limits, for sure. Blood and Shadow Warrior, I'll lump these ones together. They were also on the build engine. They were on the same engine as Duke Nukem 3D. Blood took its inspiration from campy horror flicks, Evil Dead, Army of Darkness, and whatnot, whereas Shadow Warrior was almost, it was racist against Asians to the point that, it was just bad and insensitive. Both games are violent as shit. They both have great level design, especially Shadow Warrior, which was, if I'm not mistaken, the last commercial game developed on the build engine. So they really put it to its limit. Shadow Warrior had an A-bomb weapon, which was you know, like a rocket, an atomic rocket that was like a one-off shoot. It was like the secondary feature of the rocket launcher. You could carry 10 rockets, or however many rockets, but you could carry one A-bomb, and it really was that fucking epic. Like you had to find a section of the map that was just wide open, and shoot this rocket to the furthest possible point, and then fucking run as far away as you could from it before it detonated, because it was a gigantic fucking weapon. It was the big fucking gun times 10, easily. The most destructive weapon in any video game ever, and it's just awesome. The enemy types are varied, and again, they really find the limits of the build engine, because some enemies climb up walls and jump at you, and other enemies, that's probably the most interesting thing they do. But there's ghosts that phase in and out, sort of like the teleporters in Duke Nukem 3D, and it's just a badass game. One of the weapons is an enemy skull, and the enemy can shoot fireballs out of its eyes, and you can take its head and stick your fingers in its brain to make it shoot fireballs, and so that's cool. It featured dual weapons. You could wield 2 Uzis at a time. It was gory as hell, super fucking gory. Again, blood was gory. It's probably funnier, and it has some of the best weapons in video games ever. For instance, it's the only game I know of where you can use a can of hairspray as a flamethrower, and you can bust the top off of it and light the propulsion and throw it and turn it into a grenade. And the first gun you get is a flare gun, and you can shoot cultists and set them on fire. There's zombies, demons, cultists, and the like, and it takes place in a very dark, muddy sort of world that just does violence right. Blood 2 is good, but Blood is far out. Check it out. The Fear series. Some people didn't like Fear because the scripted scare moments were exactly that. And while I think it was interesting to see the cinematic route they took with the scare sequences, now this is standard of games now to have shaders or post-processing on the screen that makes it look like an old beat-up horror movie, or black rose petals floating around on the screen or whatever. When Fear did it, it was pretty much new to video game, and that was the sort of thing that only movies did. So at the time it was unique. And whether or not you like scary video games, that's not really what Fear was about. Fear was taking the Max Payne bullet times mechanic and making it useful in first-person shooters. Now, this game is impossible to play, at least on difficult mode, without the bullet time, because the AI is that fucking smart. Fear has some of the smartest AI in shooters ever, even by today's standards, and I think that's what made it so successful, is the way that enemies would flank you and outthink you constantly. And the only way that you could keep up with them is keep the body count rolling with your bullet time and stay ahead of them and keep maneuvering. A lot of the game took place in like office environments and stuff, so it would be a series of rooms, and you would have to stay ahead of the field of fire or whatever, just so that you wouldn't get cornered and fucking raped. It was also good because it was probably the most had the most detailed destruction effects since Max Payne, where individual items like bottles or pencils or screwdrivers would roll off of desks and papers would fly in the air as glass is shattering. Like real action movie, shootout type stuff, which was standard throughout the whole game. Plus you had bullet time, so everything slowed down and it looked really cool. So if graphics are by any means important to you, Fear does have some incredible graphics that hold up today, but its main merit is the AI, which still outshoots most first-person shooters. Deus Ex. Now, I listed here that to play the first one because 2 was stupid and 3 was good, but 1 does it best, and that's really what it is. Everyone says that the graphics are atrocious. I didn't notice. I played Deus Ex after I played Half-Life when I was, less than 12 years old. I'm not sure how old I was. But the level of emergent gameplay in Deus Ex is astonishing. There were moments, months after the game's release, where the developers would receive letters from fans about how they completed a particular mission, and the developers not only hadn't planned for it, but hadn't even thought of it. There's so much room to play that game sandbox style. Plus, this is back when open-ended first-person shooting missions were rare, if not non-existent. You could explore entire areas of China, multiple maps wide. You could do the same thing in Paris and in New York City. So in between missions or during missions, there was an open gameplay element. Not to mention it had less lethal weapons like pepper spray and pepper bombs and just a whole bunch of different weapons, ammo types. It also had RPG elements, which would allow you to level up certain stats like swimming or hacking. You could hack computer systems and turn the cameras off or turn the automated turret systems on the enemy. Again, this might not sound very unique, but Deus Ex did all of these things first. They did a lot of different things first, and it still does it best. In my opinion, it's better than Human Revolution. It's not as cut and dry as Human Revolution. That was kind of... I enjoyed Human Revolution, by the way, but it was the moral element, the question of augmentation, as a real thing in the future, the black and white morality of natural humans versus human augmentation was just ridiculous. It was really bad how everyone in the game seemed to want to discuss the same fucking issue, and they all had either one opinion on it or the other. Everyone was on one side of a fence through the whole game, and that's all everyone ever wanted to seem to talk about. It's very rare to see just a random average conversation going on in Human Revolution, which is common in Deus Ex. At the time, it had more audio barks than any other game. I think it had over 5,000 audio barks. To those of you who don't know, audio bark is just a statement that an NPC makes, a sentence that they bark out. And again, to this day, Deus Ex has some of the most open-ended gameplay, some of the most interesting storytelling, highbrow literature. This is before Morrowind. You could find books scattered through, or books and articles and newspapers scattered throughout the game. You could hack virtually any computer interface and read people's emails. So it did the same thing Human Revolution did, but like a decade earlier. Good stuff. Good stuff. Plus, there was like 8 augmentation slots, and you could only choose one or the other augmentation, and that was your choice through the whole game. So you could either have silent running, or you could have quick running. You could have combat strength, which would increase your muscles for melee weapons, or you could have, just strength, which would increase the maximum weight that you could lift up. Like, instead of lifting small crates, you could lift large crates, which opened up new options for creating ambush points and all sorts of stuff. I could go on about Deus Ex forever, but we're probably already at like 20 minutes now. So, the Thief series. Incredible games, incredible games. Thief 4 is in the works, for those of you who don't know, by the same people that did Human Revolution, I think. So that's promising. Originally it was going, when Looking Glass Studios still had their hands on the project, they were thinking about making it a modern time Thief. And they had Garrett, they had concept art of Garrett but he was wearing jeans and a hoodie, and he had a silenced pistol, and that was just badass. But anyway, Thief 4, it's pretty clear that it's going to take place in the same steampunk world that the first three will take place in. Thief had, again, open-ended levels. The only way you could really play to win is by stealth. You had a sword and you had arrows, and you could fend for yourself against a guard, but more than one guard, and you're all of a sudden you got your back to the wall and you're in a tight situation. It had all sorts of unique items like moss arrows that you could shoot on the ground. I should preface that by saying that different floor surfaces made different levels of noise when you walked across them, and being that stealth was your only real option, you would have to consider the noise of the floor when creeping up on a guard to knock him out and hide his body in the shadows. At the time, it had the most advanced lighting engine in the gaming industry. You could use water arrows to shoot out torches and create shadows for yourself to hide in. You could create fire, or you could use fire arrows and light torches back up, and you could use rope arrows on any wooden surface to reach higher stories. There's also like an occult element in the game with zombies and monsters and stuff. I think the third mission of the game, of the first game, takes you into a gigantic crypt or catacomb where you have to retrieve a family heirloom from the back of a crypt. And that level was scary as fuck, because unless you have holy water arrows, you can't take out, or fire arrows, you can't take out zombies personally. You can drop them with arrows and with swords, but they get back up eventually. And that was, it was impossible, really, to kill all the enemies in a level. And especially back when you're like 10 years old and you gotta work around zombies. I don't care what anyone says, Thief had the scariest zombies in any game ever. And if you found a screenshot of them, you might not think so, but they will scare the piss out of you if you ever play the game. Thief 2, the story wasn't so much emphasized as much as the gameplay. Whereas in the first game, the levels were built around the story. In the second game, the story was built around the levels. So the developers had more freedom to create interesting environments to explore. They opened up the playable size of the maps. So they improved the engine and increased the graphics to 32 bits. I think Thief 1 was at best 24-bit graphics, which is rare for a PC game to my knowledge. But the levels were focused on gameplay more, so they took the experiences from Thief 1 and they polished it, just polished and polished it, made it amazing. Thief 3 was a decent entry in the series, but Warren Spector took some steps backwards, like he did in Deus Ex Invisible War. He removed the sword, he removed the rope arrows, and the animation studio that did the beautiful videos between levels were replaced with what are they called? Like pre-rendered sequences that actually looked worse than the game somehow. I don't know how they managed that, but ugly fucking cutscenes. But it was still a good game. It was, Thief with more advanced lighting. They took a lot of steps backwards. They had Loot Glimmer, where instead of finding things to steal, the game points them out to you. Because it was the first game in the series on consoles, and they had to cater to console gamers. But you can find mods that tweak the gameplay to make it more like the originals, more challenging for the true fans. So check them out. If graphics aren't a big deal to you, Thief is an amazing game. The Stalker series, Shadow of Chernobyl, Clear Sky, and Call of Pripyat. I can't say much about these games other than that they take place in real-world Chernobyl. I know the original game was 60% accurate to the landscape of Chernobyl. They made some changes and moved things around for the sake of smooth gameplay arc or challenge arc, but the locations are accurate. They are not only based on real-world locations, but the developers actually lived a short drive from Chernobyl, and they took at least 5 tours into the zone to take photographs as research for their game. There are mutant animals. Hell, I can't even do Stalker justice. I'll just say that it's an open-world first-person shooter with military elements and survival horror elements, and it's, as far as sandbox first-person shooting goes, you don't get more sandbox than Stalker. Check it out. It's amazing. Amazing. Oh yeah, also check out on moddatabase.com, moddb.com, check out Stalker Complete. There's a variety of mods, but Stalker Complete is a mod that you can pretty much be guaranteed that it will polish the experience, it'll improve the graphics, it'll tweak the AI without changing the core gameplay at all. It just makes Stalker more the way it was supposed to be. So check out the Stalker Complete mods, especially if you have a good gaming rig. Arma. The reason I listed Arma is because it's the latest in a series of first-person simulation, army simulation games. Unforgiving AI. As far as real, and people throw the word realistic around to describe video games like it means nothing, but if you want the most realistic military experience on the computer, it would either be America's Army or Arma. Red Faction series was one of the first games to introduce destructible environments virtually wherever you went. That's the only reason it's on this list. Other than that, it's, in my opinion, it's not the best game, but it did allow you to dig a tunnel around some enemies if you had enough explosives, so that's cool. I thought it was worth listing because it had such a big impact on the community, and when it came out, people didn't think it was possible to have destruction on that scale. Since then, there's been Red Faction 2 and Guerrilla and Apocalypse is that what the latest one's called. I had some experience with Red Faction Guerrilla on the 360, and it was fun. You know, it was fun. Call of Cthulhu. Cthulhu. It can't be pronounced by human vocal cords, so get over it. Dark Corners of the Earth. It is just a really badass game. Sometimes the graphics are a little iffy, you know, a little blocky or splotchy, but the gameplay is incredible. It takes place in a fictional town called Innsmouth, where the locals do not like strangers. Strangers are there on business. They're only there for a short period of time, and they get the hell out because people there are scary. And you are hired to investigate the disappearance of an individual. So you're the first game of the first part of the game you play a private detective. In the second part of the game, it shifts over to survival horror, and in the third part of the game, it shifts more into straight first-person shooter. It had a unique health system where you had psychological health and physical health, and psychological health was replenished with, you know, finding a place where you could catch your breath or making progress in the game, sort of like Amnesia: The Dark Descent. And physical health was divided into bandages, splints, painkillers, and something else. So you, rather than having a health bar, the different areas of your body, you know, your left upper arm, or your left arm, and your left leg, and your torso and your head, all had individual health bars that had to be treated based on the injury. So you would have to, so if you had burn injuries and all you had was splints, then you were shit out of luck. You want to be able to repair your health at that point, which would affect your performance in the game. You'd start dragging around, you know, it'd slow you down and make you more vulnerable to future attacks. There are some stealth sequences in the game. You never feel like you have enough ammo, and this is this is before Bioshock, which did the whole make it seem like you don't have much ammo, but always drop as much as you need trick that they did. I doubt they fooled anyone but, you know, kids. This game actually, this was back when health drops and ammo drops had to be strategically placed by the developer to provide a challenging experience for everyone. And they did a good job of it. And they did a very good job of it. I won't say more at risk of ruining the atmosphere of the game. Again, check it out. Amnesia: The Dark Descent is one of the few games where you cannot kill the enemy. You have to hide from the enemy. That's the only choice you have. All the while you're trying to uncover the some mystery. The same studio made a couple games called I can almost see it in my head. Penumbra. There was a couple Penumbra games which were good. They followed the same routine as Amnesia: Dark Descent, where you are basically the lone survivor or the only living person in a very brooding atmosphere, and you have to delve deeper into a mystery to escape. All the while you have to dodge enemies that you cannot possibly kill, except in rare sequences. I guess I don't have more to say about that other than, as far as scary games go, people with any knowledge of first-person or PC survival horror games will list The Dark Descent as among the best. So check out Amnesia: Dark Descent if you're looking for a scare. Aliens vs. Predator. I'm not sure how this game would hold up by today's standards, but it was 3 full campaigns. There was the Human campaign, which was the survival horror game, and then there was the Predator and Alien campaigns, where you actually played as an alien. Excuse me. False alarm. You played as an alien, creeping in the shadows and along walls, and you would eat corpses to replenish your health, and you couldn't take much damage, so you had to take the stealth route, and you had to lure human enemies away from each other and take them out one at a time, which is really cool. And then there's the Predator gameplay, where you are the badass Predator with all the weapons from the movies and then some. And so each campaign had played very distinctly. They were each full games, or at least, they'd take you at least 6 hours, so it had a bundle of gameplay. Plus there was survival modes where you could play a multiplayer map by yourself and try to survive against hordes of aliens as, I think, just as human. Maybe you could do it as Predator too. And this is back when I had a 56k AOL connection when I was playing this game, so it wasn't really an option to hop online. I'm not sure how robust the community is anymore, but there was an online gameplay where you could play as a Marine, a Predator, or an alien all on the same server, which I imagine that if you got some good friends, that must be a really badass experience. There's been Aliens vs. Predators 2, and I think one more recently came out on the 360. I played that for a little while, and it's pretty much the same formula. So if you want to check them out at all, your best bet would probably be the new one. But I recommend you check out at least one of them. So, Return to Castle Wolfenstein at the time had the best AI. It had polished gameplay, well-designed maps. It didn't revolutionize anything in the first-person shooter category, but it was one of the first games where reloading was a big deal. You had to plan your reloads just like in Counter-Strike, which I guess is pretty common today, but Return to Castle Wolfenstein did it like no other back then, where firefights were visceral. They still felt real and fresh, and it wasn't about drawing a bead, killing and repeat. Back then it felt like a real firefight, at least to us kids that have never been in combat. But it did a better job of the firefight experience than any game before it. and the AI will try to flank you, and it's smart. And then later on in the game, it shifts into some survival horror with with different Nazi experiments and zombies and stuff. And it was also the first game to feature real looking fire, so it gets points for that, I think. Postal 2 is on the list because as far as sandbox first person shooters go, you can't get much better than pissing in someone's mouth to make them puke and then cutting their head off with a shovel and seeing puke come out of their neck hole, or using a cat as a silencer, or pissing on a donut and then getting a cop to pick it up and eat it and puke. Incredibly prejudiced, racist, lowbrow game, but what other game can you light an entire band, what do you call them? You could light a marching band on fire with a puddle of gasoline. Better than the first one, which was an isometric shooter, and better than the third one. From the videos I've seen, the third one's virtually unplayable. And by today's standards, Postal 2 might not even be worth playing, but when it came out, it was badass. It was a great game. So I put it on the list just because I had I spent so many hours playing that game and I loved it. Same with Soldier of Fortune 2. That came out, I think, when I was 12, and it had the best multiplayer system, voting system. All of the voting and all those scripts that you have to get on Counter-Strike and any other games to have any kind of fun with it was all incorporated into Soldier of Fortune 2, and they weren't even going to have a multiplayer mode originally, or at least that's what they told the press. And they come out with this full-fledged multiplayer game that rivals Unreal Tournament, that rivals Counter-Strike. It had Capture the Flag, Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch. It had Infiltrate mode, which was basically the VIP mode from early Counter-Strike. Instead of getting the VIP to the extraction zone or the hostages, you'd have to get a briefcase and carry it to the extraction point. And then there was Demolition mode, which is the same thing as Counter-Strike. Same thing. And the gore was great. The single player campaign was solid, but the multiplayer really shined. And I spent over a year with the multiplayer. That's as close to professional as I got. I was on our clan was number 2 on the Cal ladder, the Soldier of Fortune Cal ladder, for a while. It was one of the few games that found a balance between Unreal Tournament's balls to the wall, weapon spamming, and Counter-Strike's more tactical, fast twitch gameplay. In Counter-Strike, unless you know what you're doing, you pretty much have to stay still while you line up your shots. And Unreal Tournament's the exact opposite. You got to keep moving. Soldier of Fortune 2 found a great balance between those two with their weapons. They're basically shotguns, pistols, and rifles and assault rifles. It found a happy medium between those two modes of gameplay. I'm not sure how the servers look these days, but oh my god, it was just amazing. One of the best games of all time. One of the best shooters of all time, in my opinion. There's 2 games left on the list. There's Far Cry, which had huge sandbox maps, physics, cutting-edge graphics, fresh gameplay, a combination of mutants and soldiers like Half-Life. It took everything from the other successful shooters of that period and rolled it into one. The only revolutionary thing about it was the size of the maps. It was the first game where the draw distance was 5 kilometers. You could take a pair of binoculars and you could look from one island to another island, and that might not amaze you youngins, but that was unfucking heard of when Far Cry came out. Not only did it exceed any view distance in any game before, it blew it out of the fucking water. It just completely revolutionized how that works, I guess. How far you can see in games, and you could scout out an enemy base with binoculars before entering, and gather intel on how you're going to approach it. And then you could approach it from any direction with any number of with any tactics. had decent stealth element. It kind of fell flat as soon as you got detected. That was pretty much it. You were in a firefight. Same with Far Cry 2 and Crysis and everything, but Far Cry was the first. It had great graphics for its time, and it came from a virtually unheard of developer with this new engine that they had been working on that was just as good, if not better, than other game engines at the time. Great experience. The last game on our list is Clive Barker's Undying. I never beat Clive Barker's Undying. I got to the second boss. Clive Barker, as you know, has done some novels and been involved in some horror movies, and he had a very close relationship with the developers during the course of this game, so it has Clive Barker's touch to it. It's one of the scariest first-person shooters ever. One of the first, you have a weapon with your left hand, or with your right hand, you perform magic with your left hand, and one of the first magical abilities you get is the ability to see into the etheric realm. So you might be in a room that looks normal enough, and then you turn on your spirit vision, and you can see a murder that took place, and you can see blood-soaked walls and stuff, and then this is all the while there's a maid cleaning up a stain on the floor, and she doesn't see any of that. So it was a really strange experience. It takes place at this mansion. You were friends with a man in war, and he's on his deathbed. He's admitted to you that his family's been cursed, and that you, being the occult detective that you are now, which is a very interesting genre, by the way, occult detectives. You could check that out, find some neat comic books. He confides in you that his family's cursed, and he wants you to get to the bottom of it, and if possible, lift the curse of his family before he dies. He doesn't want to be eternally damned. He's I think the youngest of 5 siblings, all of whom have returned from the grave, and they're the bosses in the game. And this takes place on his estate, which is a giant island and a series of buildings. So you go from area to area, encountering new enemy types. Pretty much always a step behind of the enemy. They will even the first enemy in the game, you'll encounter them the whole way throughout. These beasts that, they got claws and they sort of jump around. They got horns. I don't know how to describe them really, but even the basic enemy in the game will fucking tear you a new asshole the whole way through. So, a very challenging game, unique level design, especially being that seeing into the spirit vision is a core element of the gameplay. And there are some truly trippy, scary, just off-the-wall, gruesome moments in that game. And anyone that's a fan of horror, I highly recommend that you check out Clive Barker's Undying. So that's it for this video. Thank you for listening, and we'll do another one later. So have a great night, guys.